Hey, good evening, everyone. So we're going to go ahead and start with our May 2020 Hub Captains meeting. And I've got everybody currently muted, but as we go through the agenda, we can relax that a little bit. It's just as you enter, sometimes we had some spurious noise. Is there anybody out there? Please use the raise your hand feature who would like to take minutes tonight. Hint, hint, help, help. Hope, hope. Okay. No, seeing no hands. Gabrielle has heroically offered one more time. And so she'll go ahead and take the minutes for us. If anybody has logged on using a phone number, I'm going to eventually want to make sure you identify yourselves. We'll watch for that so she can get the name when we do the around the rooms. So we're going to save those around the rooms for afterwards and go ahead and let our guest speaker talk. Jon Sui is with the City of Seattle. He is our what's called a chief building official. Sorry,
building official. Yeah,
you can do it all. And I've met him because of the questions Hubs has about how does building inspection work post major disaster. And so in the time I've known him, there's been a group that has developed a program. So he's going to share two things with us tonight: that program, and then just some of the aspects of in the City of Seattle. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jon and let him share his screen. And I'm going to go close my window so I can hear you guys. So Jon, go ahead and share.
All right. Thank you. Good evening, all. Let me get my screen going here.
And for those just joining, Jon did say he's open to taking questions as he goes along.
Yeah.
So
that's
hopefully
fine.
I can watch the watch your hands go up.
Okay. Yeah, so if you have anything that needs clarification or whatever, I can certainly try to answer them. So as Cindy said, actually I'm holding two titles. I'm the principal engineer and building official for the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections. Those of you who have been in Seattle and dealing with us for a long time know that this is the fourth iteration of a name that we've had in the last almost 40 years. So that's our current name. Those, again, veterans may remember us as DCLU, the Department of Construction and Land Use, or DCLU, the Department of Design, Construction and Land Use for a while. And then we were DPD, the Department of Planning and Development, and now we are Seattle Department of Construction and Inspection, so SDCI. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about, as Cindy said, what is it that we do for emergency response, and then talk about this other program. Oh, by the way, just so for background, part of my job, we'll talk about what the daily job is and kind of what our department does, but my personal job is if there is a big disaster, then I get called in to kind of head up our response. And so that's why I'm kind of sort of the department authority on all of this, aside from having written the emergency response plan. So, personal experience, I did go to the Los Angeles area after the 1994 Northridge earthquake, and was able to actually spend a day posting buildings, and we'll talk about what that means, in the Los Angeles area. I've also, then the next event was we had a bunch of landslides in the late 90s, and we'll show you some pictures of that. And then of course we had the 2001 Nisqually earthquake, in which I was directing again the department's response efforts. And then I did have the opportunity to visit Japan shortly after the March 11th event in 2011. So we got to, we took a team of engineers over there to look around and see what we could learn from the response and things there. And a lot about, of course, what do their codes do and how do we design buildings here. So that's kind of my background in the area. I do a lot of the training for these types of events. So again, if you have questions, please just go ahead and jump in. Okay, so jumping in a little bit, our SDCI, our mission statement is to help people build safe, livable, and inclusive Seattle. We've, and among our, for our employees, folks who work for us. We value equity, respect, quality, integrity, and service. So what do we do when it comes around to a emergency response? Well, before we get into that, our Clark Kent persona is to our normal business every day. We regulate construction, we do the reviews, we review plans, we review the permit applications, we do land use code, we do building code, a whole bunch of other things like that, all related to building structures or building buildings in Seattle. We also have a division who enforces your continuing compliance with the codes. So zoning, weeds, litter, all these other things, complaints, they deal with all of those. That same division also deals with the tenant landlord rules. So if those of you who are again familiar with Seattle, we have a tenant relocation assistance ordinance, for instance. And then this division administers that ordinance. So we're usually doing things like building, right? Admittedly, most people don't like dealing with us because we cost them time and money. But when it comes around to disasters, we've had a little bit better response. So when a disaster comes, so what do? This is a photo from OSO landslide in 2014. Well, if we have an earthquake, we respond to that. These are photos from the Nisqually earthquake in 2001. If we have a landslide, we deal with those. We respond and look at the buildings there. This is from the winter. These pictures are from the winter 1996-97 storms and landslides. We had about 300 something landslides that year. A little bit smaller in scale, but still somewhat devastating. This is a picture of the Greenwood explosion in 2016. And what we do here is we are looking at buildings in the blast radius. So looking at buildings all around this for damage. And we get down to small things like cars running into buildings. This is not Seattle. This is actually my house in 2006. Was a little bit fun dealing with that one, but this is the kind of thing, again, that our department does in response to emergencies. So cars run into buildings, we'll get a call in the middle of the day and say, can you send an inspector down here, and we'll take a look and make sure that the building is safe to be in or not. So that is the meat of what we do as a department. We do what we call building safety assessments. We post these placards that indicate where the building can be safely occupied, and I put safely in quotes for a couple of reasons, and I'll get to that in just a sec. But you do have the red, typical red, yellow, green tags. These are our current tags, are similar to, at least. I think we've updated them a little bit since then. But these are printed in 14 languages with the warning language there, so that we can at least tell people what the problems are, or whether it's safe to go in the building. I do want to say we're not first responders, but we do provide information to policymakers. We try to communicate risk to the people without totally freaking them out. The red, again, we say is unsafe, don't go in. The yellow, we're saying there are some parts of the building that you can go in, or there's some other limitation on there on occupying the building. And then green says, you notice it says just no apparent hazard. And one of the things I want to emphasize that we're not doing an inspection. Inspection means you're spending a lot of time, you're kind of looking at things very carefully. These evaluations are done in about 20 to 30 minutes. Quick walk around the outside. If it's safe, we go inside and take a look around, but it's very, very cursory. And one of the problems we actually ran into after Nisqually was the mayor started promising free earthquake inspections by our department. At which point when we started going out and visiting people who were asking for these, they were a little disappointed that we weren't crawling around in their crawl spaces and things like that, looking at their building. So just want to be clear, and that's kind of the extent of what we do. I put safe in quotes because we've had some experience, particularly in Christchurch, the Christchurch, New Zealand events in 2010, 2011, where they had one large earthquake and people, we had engineers, they had engineers go out and do the tags on the buildings. There are many buildings that were green tagged. They had a second earthquake some months later, much larger, much closer to the city, and a bunch of those buildings collapsed. And so people were saying, and then quite a few people got killed. People were saying, well, what good is this green tag, right? It didn't really say it was safe. And so what we're trying to communicate with it is that, well, at the snapshot in time that we have right now, we don't see anything wrong with it. And so there's a reduced risk. There's no such thing as zero risk, just as, there's no such thing as an earthquake-proof building. There's no such thing as that. So there's nothing that is absolutely safe. We just are saying that it's a reduced risk. So it's international system was developed actually in the 1980s in California. It's called ATC 20, Post-Earthquake Evaluation of Buildings. And this is a picture from Japan in 2011, where they actually had the same, very similar, as you can see, red tag for this building that was multiple stories and had some pretty extensive concrete structural damage there. Even for landslides, though, this is a picture actually from Japan as well. But even for landslides, the focus is all about the structures for our department. We're just looking at, is the building safe to occupy? If there's threats to the right-of-way, to the streets, to utilities, that's not really our job. That's something for the other city departments to deal with. And our Seattle Public Utilities is the one that kind of heads up most of those efforts. They're kind of the lead agency on that. We just look at the buildings. So if that slide that you see in the picture here, that landslide were to be going over the street, that's something that we would be calling the SDOT, the Seattle Department of Transportation, to kind of deal with.
So John,
yes.
So that's a question. So your inspector would look at this and go, well, technically the structure on the building is okay, but there's other risks involved. Would he still placard it green, or would he wait until any other departments who needed to make the call made the call?
He would still placard the building green.
Okay.
So that's it. Now, the interesting thing is that if there's another building downslope of this that's being threatened by it, then we have to make kind of the judgment call, does it look like it's going to threaten the building? In which case, then we can tag the downhill building and say, no, sorry, you can't occupy this.
Okay.
Okay, so we do have a plan, and I mentioned that we're on the 4th iteration of a name. This was developed into our 3rd iteration, and we haven't updated the cover art because we haven't been using paper documents for a long time, so we don't need to. So I apologize for the DPD on there, but that's what we have. But we are part of the larger city plan. Our plan, as written, kind of organizes us, tells us how we're going to organize to do this response, again, with the whole focus being, how do we get out there and put these tags out? It tells us lines of communication, who's responsible for gathering what information and how do we get it to various people. It says how we deploy people, sets up priorities, which will kind of affect what we talk about later. And our priorities are going to be essential facilities, first of all. And we think one of our most essential facilities is the building that we're in so that we can operate. So we've got the city campus, Seattle Municipal Tower, the City Hall, the Justice Center, and the Emergency Operations Center are kind of our first priority. We've got other priorities in there, and then it's whatever the mayor decides in those first few days. It could be schools, it could be shelters, it could be community centers. It just kind of depends on what the event is and what we're planning to do. Then we have to go out there and actually look at those buildings. After those priorities, then come commercial buildings, and then after that, lastly, the lowest priority are residential buildings. And again, the whole plan is framed around our plan is framed around an earthquake response because that's the biggest one that's going to challenge us the most, and it's scalable down from that. So when we have a landslide response, we'll have a similar organization, but we won't do everything that we say in the plan. So let's do some math here. What you're seeing, by the way, is a picture again from Japan, one of the towns that we visited there. This is after the tsunami went through. And those of you who are not familiar with how big the tsunami was in this particular town, that building in the middle, you can see floats on top of there. Those are boat floats. The building was overtopped. That's a 3-story building, was overtopped by the tsunami in this town. But for us, we have over 100,000 buildings in Seattle is my guess. We don't actually have good numbers on that. I was kind of asking around and nobody's got good numbers on how many buildings we actually have. Our capacity though, we can field up to 50 teams of 2 each. That's what a team consists of 2 people. It's probably more like we're gonna have 25 out in the field because we have other things we're gonna be doing or people won't be available if it's a really big event. We figure a team can do somewhere between 10 to 15 evaluations per team per day, which means if we decide we need to look at every single building in Seattle, that's 250 days to get it all done, assuming 400 buildings per day and 100,000 buildings. So that you can see how long it's going to actually take us to get around to places. So the upshot is that we're going to need help if we have a large scale event, and a large scale event is going to be something like a Seattle fault event. That is one that's the fault that runs basically along I-90, goes through Alki and through Bellevue, and that could be a very, very, very damaging event. Richter, if you just talk Richter scale, doesn't sound that big. It's a 7.5-ish, could be. But it's going to be shallow and it's going to be very close to us. And so we'll get major damage in the city from that. The one that you may have also heard about is the Cascada subduction zone. That's the one off the coast. That can be a Richter magnitude of 9. That is very, very large. That's going to could damage a whole swath of coastline from Northern California up to middle of Vancouver Island. That would be another huge event. Here in Seattle, we're far enough away. We'll get a good shake and it will last a very long time. But it may not be as damaging here in Seattle as it would be on the coast. Excuse me. Just as a note, when you talk about a Seattle fault event, those of you who remember Nisqually may figure, if you remember how badly it was shaking there, that was a pretty mild event actually. And you figure you take that and multiply how hard you were shaking by about 3 or 4. And that's what a Seattle fault event will feel like. You're gonna get, this furniture is gonna be slamming all over the place, appliances will move. You're gonna be really hanging on for dear life if you're under a table where you're supposed to be, right? Your drop, cover, and hold. You're gonna be hanging on for dear life on that. And that lasts probably 30 seconds to 45 seconds. Figure the Nisqually earthquake was about 25 seconds long. The Cascada subduction zone, the amount of shaking you'll feel is about the same as the Nisqually earthquake, if you remember that again, but it's gonna last anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes. So if you thought, I was under a table in our building and for 25, 30 seconds, that felt like a long time. So just multiply that times, a lot and 10 times, up to 10 times, and that's how long it's gonna be. So it could be a very, very long event, and it will create damage just because it shakes for so long. Now, the upshot though is, again, given all these numbers, if we do have one of those events, the neighborhoods are gonna be on their own. And that's why, you're setting up these hubs and things like that. And I really appreciate Cindy, helping lead those efforts, because we're not going to be able to get to you. So how do we get help? We call in the cavalry, right? Cavalry. And what we've developed is a coalition called WASAFE, and it's the Washington State Safety Assessment Facility Evaluators. And I know people have said that's redundant, but it's a cool acronym. So we call ourselves WASAFE. It's a coalition of volunteers with 4 non-governmental agencies. The first one is the Washington Association of Building Officials, the American Institute of Architects, that's actually the state organization, not just the Seattle organization. The American Society of Civil Engineers, that is just the Seattle chapter. And the Structural Engineers Association of Washington, the statewide organization of structural engineers. The 4 of us have formed a coalition to kind of put this and organize ourselves and put the program on and administer the program, with lots of help from the Department of Health, who has loaned us their database. Lets us use that for our purposes. So who are we? Well, first of all, what's our purpose? Our purpose is to prevent the tent cities, right? We want people to be staying in their homes, staying in their buildings if it's safe. So we want to help people reoccupy safe buildings. And I know what happens after a lot of earthquakes, and we hear it all the time, and it happened in Northridge as well in 1994, is that people are, even if the building looks safe, and even a lot of times if the authorities have said it's safe to go in, people are reluctant to re-enter because they're scared. And our hope is to be able to alleviate some of that fear through what we do here. But the numbers, in general, 70% of buildings affected by earthquakes can be reoccupied safely, and there's, with only minor damage. So there are several things that happen, obviously, that helps the economy. It takes pressure off of the social services who need to help out the people who do have severely damaged buildings. And, as far as the economy in the region, it certainly helps the resilience there if we can get people back in their buildings, as we're finding out today. Someone compared what we're doing today, or we're experiencing today, as an earthquake in slow motion. We've got people displaced, we got people not working. The same thing can happen, certainly, of course, after an earthquake. And there's some data. There was a study done after Nisqually that said 60 to 70% of small businesses have to go out of business, essentially, if they're not back in their buildings within a week. So that's kind of it's a real something. It's something we really want to focus on. And so our emphasis is not about keeping people out. Our emphasis is to try to say, is this safe enough for people to be in? And when we do training, we really try to emphasize that. There may be some deficiencies. You may not have sewers, you may not have water, but if you've got a roof over your head, then that's a lot better, right? So that's our focus here. We are volunteer. We have volunteers managing the enrollment of the member organizations. We're managed. The actual deployment is managed by the state Emergency Management Division, that's EMD, or the King County Emergency Management. And I'll explain what that means later in the next slide. We do have multi-hazard capability, so we can do, floods, we can do wind damage, we can do earthquakes. Right now, there are about 200 engineers, architects, building official types, and building inspectors, folks like that, on the what I would consider active role in WASAFE. And that's most of them are in Western Washington, but there's a handful in Eastern Washington. So how does it work? If we have an event, we do our local response first, and that includes activating any mutual aid agreements we may have with our neighbors. If you got I figure if we have a earthquake event, I'm not going to bother with mutual aid because everyone's going to be busy, right? So what happens is that if we get overloaded, then we can request additional resources through our local emergency operations center. They then forward the request to the county. If the county can't get that taken care of, then they forward the request to the state, and the state then initiates contact with our coordinators in WASAFE. We have regions kind of set up based on the same as the FEMA regions for their state. For our coordinators, our hope is that, and we've been trying to recruit on the east side of the mountains, that we have some folks who can help coordinate the response on the eastern side of the mountains, because we figure if we have a large event, again, Seattle Fault or Cascadia event, all the folks on the west side are going to be very busy. So we hope, again, to have be able to have people who can get things organized who aren't involved in the actual response. So we've kind of organized ourselves in these regions. When the volunteers show up, WASAFE will say we'll get them sent to the right people who ask. The idea is that we have to deputize them. So this is kind of important for some of the topics later as we talk. Non-jurisdictional personnel cannot post official jurisdiction placards unless they're deputized. So those placards I showed you, the red, green, and yellow ones, only we can put them up. It's because they're a legal document, or people that we actually deputize. So we'll get volunteers and we'll have them raise their hand and say, blah, 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 whatever we make them swear to. And basically then they become essentially acting in our interests, or as sort of like our employees, but they're not employed by us.
So John, that is a clarifying question for me. If there is an architect that a church has put on contract to do post-earthquake building inspections, they can only inspect, but they cannot placard?
Yes and no. Okay. We do have a system that I've set up in Seattle that we've called the advisory tag system, and essentially allows professionals who hopefully know what they're doing post what we call advisory tags. They don't have the force of law behind them, but they are they give information to the people, to the public who are coming to the building, to anyone who's in the building, and that's the most important part as far as I'm concerned. It's a fine point at this stage. So yes, the volunteer can look through it and can post an advisory tag, subject to some issues we'll talk about later.
Okay, thank you.
So, okay, and this is later, I think. Professional immunity. For those who are licensed professionals like myself, engineer or architect, you have a certain amount of responsibility if you do things or don't do things. Technically, if I walk past a building and I see something that's obviously dangerous from an engineering standpoint, I have to report that building, or else my license essentially is at risk. They could take away my license if I don't do something about it. So I have some professional responsibility to do things. However, that also means I can get sued, right? If I do things. So in the case of an emergency like an earthquake, there's the Good Samaritan law, Good Sam law, that's out there. But it's like the doctor who stops on the side of the road and helps someone who's been injured in a car accident. They are not liable if something bad happens, right? As long as they provided reasonable care, right? They're not negligent. So the same thing happens with engineers and architects. You can do some of that work, but it's only if you're covered as a registered emergency worker. And that's the way the law is written today. There's some of us that are dreaming about maybe trying to do some legislation in the next session, I don't think it'll go this session, it'd have to go some other session, but to kind of broaden that a little bit. But at this point, you're only covered for liability, or not covered, you're not immune from liability if you're a registered emergency worker. That means you're either government employed, so we're automatically covered, or you're operating as a temporary emergency worker under a state issued mission number. So that means you have to go sign up at the local EOC that I'm registered, I'm registering as a temporary emergency worker, and then you get deputized by us. And so that's how that kind of works. Other than that, so your architect or an engineer in your neighborhood, if they choose to go around and start placarding buildings on their own, they could incur some liability. And that's something to think about. And there's some case history that I'll talk about when we get to the end here. That gives us a little bit of pause.
Question about the deputies. When you deputize people, do they have to do special training, or do you deputize them based on their credentials, their professional credentials?
A little bit of both. They have to have taken one of these courses, how to tag buildings, within the last 5 years. That's part of the registration program that we're doing with WASAFE, is that we are checking to make sure their credentials are up to date. Same thing as if I'm a licensed engineer, my credentials my license needs to be current.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
How closely we vet them. I mean, if we're trying to get to 100,000 buildings quicker than 250 days. And, we'll probably do some cursory checking, but we're not going to go into depth on that. So we're hoping that people will do the right thing and tell us the truth, right? No, they won't lie to us when they come to us. So,
So you have people who are deputized now?
No, we don't.
Oh,
we don't pre-deputize them.
Okay, got it. Got it. It only happens at the time of the incident.
Yep.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
There are programs that do pre-deputization. San Francisco has one, but it's only for specific buildings, and the paperwork is a big hassle. It's why we haven't gone there, which is why I developed the advisory tag program. So the advisory tag program is a little more flexible. Okay, let's see. Oh, by the way, let me back up a bit on your question, Cindy, and probably make sure I get this straight. The advisory tag system is when the owner hires the professional to do this for them. So I can hire a professional engineering firm and say, you're on retainer essentially to come and do my building. That's when the advisory tag thing comes in. If someone decided to do it on their own in the neighborhood, probably should not be using that.
Right, we're not going to print them off and hand them out to people, yeah.
Right. Please. Okay, so back to the question, can we recruit engineers and architects in our own neighborhoods to conduct these building safety assessments? And the answer is yes, but there's a little bit of a but there. We would really wish that everyone would do the right thing, but money and health is at stake. Things happen. So we learned a hard lesson. We, the industry, learned a hard lesson in New York from the 9/11 response. A lot of engineers went over to New York after the collapse of the bombings and the Twin Tower collapses, and went around to evaluate buildings. Were they safe, in the radius of the blast and everything else. Then the responders started getting sick, right? They started getting lung diseases and things like that. And they started looking around for somebody to sue. And New York did not have any Good Sam laws. And so they found that, wow, these engineers carry liability insurance. Let's go after them. And I don't know the history. I have not heard if anybody actually had to pay any damages, but there were several companies who decided we're not, there may have been some who settled, just out of court so they could avoid the court fight. There were some who put up a fight. And so that meant these firms had to spend money to defend themselves for something that really wasn't anything near what they were evaluating, right? So that's why we're pretty careful when we train people, the architects and engineers, to tell them, yes, you can go out and we're not telling you not to do your neighborhood, do the right thing, but just understand that if somebody gets unhappy with you, they might sue you. So don't get anyone mad at you. That's kind of the lesson from that. So you may get some professionals who are a little bit reluctant to take that on.
Yeah, just for the crowd, I sat at the back of an ATA 20 class, and there was probably 35 people in there. And when they got to the discussion point about, well, what if this happens and we're not, you know, we haven't reported and got called in by WASAFE, and or, you know, we're not under the emergency worker, should we do this? And half the room was saying, well, of course, I'm a professional architect, I can help my neighborhood, I would assume that risk. And about half were like, no way, you know. So it is going to be a very personal discussion and decision until the Good Sam law is changed.
Yeah, yeah. So that's pretty much the end of my presentation. You got resources coming up. We've got a WASAFE webpage that's under development. So for information, you can figure out what we're about. Our organizations conduct building safety assessment training on a fairly regular basis, although we've had to cancel a couple in the last couple months. We are not quite set up for online training yet. I'm hopeful to get something by fall. Maybe we'll be able to do some of that and start doing these trainings again. And of course, the Seattle Office of Emergency Management has lots and lots of resources if you go to their website.
So I've gotten a couple of questions coming across chat.
Okay.
You might want to stay on. We're going to talk Good Samaritan law. And so when you finish, stay on for that discussion.
Sure. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So.
Okay. That's one of Jack's questions. So people are asking some of the technicality questions like, so you've got 200 people for the entire state, not just the city, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So they have to be called in to, and we'll just go back to Seattle, you know, you get 100 of those 200. So can you walk people through, you know, the question specifically is, so how do these people get to the sites to be deputized? How does the call out go and it happen so that people understand how that system works?
Okay. Actually, if I may,
sure,
the bigger question is, how does your department get somebody to these different locations when you've got transportation issues and all that going on? How do you get out, number one, notify these architects that this event, you know, for certification is going to happen or deputization is going to happen, and get the appropriate employee there from your department to do that? I mean, what's the plan for that?
Okay, so unfortunately, we're set up where they have to come to us. And it's not likely going to, well, okay, so we do have an electronic system for the call out. This registry that we're using with the Department of Health actually allows us to email, text, and place phone calls to the list of people. And so in a large event, we would just do a blast and say, hey, if you're interested or you're able, contact us and respond. And they can respond by text or email or by calling back. So that's how the call goes out. We then try to get them organized. Now, Cindy said something that was kind of interesting, you know, so we got 200 and 100 of them come to Seattle. Well, actually, one of my motivations in getting and supporting WASAFE is so that Seattle does not get 100 out of the 200 if they're needed elsewhere, and it's try to share resources across the state. So the WASAFE, what we call WASAFE coordinators, are supposed to divide people up and say, okay, you're going to Kirkland, you're going to Seattle, you're going to, you know, wherever, Forks, right? And hopefully it's somewhat close to where they already live, where they get assigned. As far as, so we do not have the resource to go out and individually deputize people. We'll ask them to, and plus we have to actually do a orientation for them. So our intent is that they'd have to make their way downtown And the other thing is that we want to team them up with somebody from our department, probably. The idea they'd have to make their way downtown, we're assuming, you know, we're going to have to assume that somehow people can get around. Otherwise, we're dead in the water anyway. So there is some talk about setting up remote, I hesitate to use the word, but hubs, not like, but you know, rally points.
Rally point. That's the phrase they're using now, is rally points.
Yeah. Rally points for this that are around the city. And if we happen to have employees who happen to live in that area of the city, then they can go to these rally points. They haven't decided where those are yet, as far as I know.
So I have a question that had to do with if you could pre-deputize people within a particular, whatever the situation was, because in an earthquake, there's not going to be any communication other than ham radios. So unless you can operate through ham radios, you're not going to be able to communicate. So it seems like if you set this up ahead of time, earthquake and isolation is one of the things that we're talking about now. If you set up programs where you could bring people in and provide them with the content and deputize them in the extent of, you know, given this situation, then this you are deputized, and have it confirmed through ham radio, because, you know, you can send out your emails and your phone calls and whatever, but they're likely not getting through. And your service is going to be one of the most critical things that we're going to have in Seattle. What is safe to occupy and what isn't. So ahead of time seems to me to be the best program.
Yeah, I would agree that. Yeah, I'm seeing that. You know, you're not going to have the electricity to run all of the things that you're talking about, as was being mentioned here by Sandy. So you really need to be able to coordinate with like ACS for radio communications. Have multiple people that can, you know, if they're in certain areas in these, you know, there's areas that are going to be isolated within the city, you know, that would be great if they could be pre-trained to carry out these deputization events, and then have something like ACS and HAM or the other radio GMRS systems say, okay, we're going to have it at this area, and the hubs can, you know, publish that, and, you know, you can get groups of people deputized without having to trudge all the way down into downtown, because that's going to be an onerous, you know, deal no matter what in the event of a major earthquake. Just a suggestion.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the other thing is that we figure we're not really going to count on local folks for us to be drawing on. We figured most of them are going to be busy servicing their clients.
Right.
So who are going to be local. So we are counting on folks from the east side of the mountains, and we're trying to do as much recruiting as we can over there, and probably from other states, probably California, realistically, is going to be sending us folks. So there are going to be transportation issues. And here's the other thing. When I say we're not first responders, depending on the size of the event, we may not even get started for several days, because we want to stay out of the way of search and rescue.
So folks, this is the message you needed to hear, because if we are concerned about going into a church as a shelter, the city cannot possibly be in our neighborhoods for, you know, I haven't looked at your department thing, but, you know, like everybody else is like, in 4 days, we'll have a shelter set up. Everybody else is out there.
Yeah.
So that is the important thing to hear in this is they have to deputize, they have to give a briefing, because they have to take these strangers and say, this is what just happened. This is our concerns of the buildings. You know, this is what we want you to do at non-ductile you know, they have to be specific instructions about what they give to the folks, which is why they, in some ways, they can't just, you know, pre-night them and, you know, put them out there and hope.
Yeah.
And so his point about your local architects servicing clients is another true one. When we have discussions with people who we say, you know, and Jack is a good one, you know, Jack, the Finney Neighborhood Center needs to go find an architect and put them on retainer so that that becomes one of the buildings that they do for some nominal fee that will invoke their insurance, right? That's the whole game we're playing here.
Yep.
So I think there's still good questions about what can we pre-stage in advance so we are not standing out in the rain for 4 days, you know, and work on that a little bit more. So, you know, I got a question too. It's like, geez, what if this happened in the pandemic? You know, we'll need to write that in too.
Oh, there's been thoughts about that. Believe me, concerns. It's a scary thing. And is, you know, it's not a whole lot different than if the earthquake were to happen off hours, right? Everyone's at home and there are not very many department employees that live in the city. You know,
I really think that we can have some conversations about how the hubs, because we all think we're going to have at least one building in our neighborhoods that we're all going to have to figure out where can we go stuff people if people are afraid to go back in their houses. And so how can we do the best we can to do that evaluation safely with professionals? And it happens before your system goes into place. So maybe when you retire, we'll bring you back for a creative conversation about how to work with the architects who live with us and just have that discussion in a way where we don't blunder and turn them off, but really we actually, you know, appeal to the right tools that they can bring.
I'd like us to talk about how we could work together to get the Good Samaritan law.
I have an update on that, so that's coming.
Okay, because that's important, because I've got all kinds of engineers and architects in my neighborhood who could go and assess all kinds of buildings if they were pre-evaluated. So obviously the Good Samaritan law is a key part, so thank you.
Other questions for
here's
John?
the other thing. Sorry, here's the other thing about the you know, pre-deputization. Again, if we get the Good Sam law fixed, the key isn't so much hanging the placards, right? The key is giving information, and so that's one of the reasons I'm not keen on pre-deputization, is that what you're giving them is the power or the authority to speak for the city, and I'm a little reluctant to do that. So, because we've had, you know, people have different philosophies, even though we try to train them to say, we really want you to focus on, can you get people back into the building? Some people are focused more on the other side, is how do we keep people out of, you know, unsafe buildings? I'm going to be very conservative, and I don't know if this building is bad, so I'm going to call it a red tag. And we want to avoid that. And we did have someone in Nisqually who came to us and volunteered and felt that their duty was to be Paul Revere, and they were running around telling people to get out of their buildings. So that kind of concerns me. So if we can give the information without it being an official city tag, that's fine with me. That's again where your volunteers come in. If we can get the Good Sam law fixed, then that they might be less reluctant to do that as a professional.
So more questions for John about either the city's role or the program, and if not, then I'll go into the Good Sam stuff. Now's your chance, because he's going to retire later this summer. John, I am actually concerned that when you leave, somebody comes in and goes, "Oh, I don't like how this is. I'm going to change it." I hope that your bosses are going to ensure some stability until the new guy gets in and learns the unique things about Seattle.
We hope so, but yeah, there's no guarantees. Obviously, you know, sometimes people like the brand new, you know, car with its flaws. Then unknown flaws than the old tried and true, right? So we'll see.
Okay. All right.
One would hope there'd be some crossover.
I'm sorry, who was that?
Jack.
Oh, say it again.
I was saying that one would hope that, you know, in the time after your retirement, excuse me a second here, that there would be some crossover time for, you know, exchange of what you know, related to the, you know, to inform the other person about why certain decisions were made.
Yep.
So,
yep. Yeah, so that we're definitely planning on that. We are actually in the process of hiring one of my replacements. They're replacing me with 2 people.
Oh, wow.
We're in the
that's
process
what
of hiring
happened when
that.
I retired.
they are that announcement actually closes on the 2nd of June. So if you know of any good engineers you want to put in my place, send them our way.
Cool. Okay.
I got a question.
Last call. Oh, Bill Fay has this question.
Quick question. Just, I've been looking for some better maps, and I understand SDCI has a lot of maps, but I haven't been able to find them, especially in a downloadable way, like vulnerability maps or just good road maps or something like this. So can you give me a clue as to where I would look for good digital maps?
That's a good question. The only map we have our GIS system, graphical, whatever they call it, interface system. But I'm not aware of like generally available maps. Other than that, we have a you know, some maps for code work, but that's as far as I know.
Bill, have you tried the Hazard Explorer?
Yeah, I've looked at that, and I've looked at the GIS maps, and what I end up doing is, you know, snapshotting them, but then they don't come out very clear.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
What's out there?
All right, well, I'll just keep looking. Thank you.
Bill, we'll talk afterwards because there may be some department stuff. I know SDOT gave us some maps at one time, and I can go look around. They gave us those green gold route maps. So it depends on what you're really looking for.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
There was, so John, one of the things that I wish we had had this conversation about a month ago, the Auxiliary Communication Service, the ham radios, they just did a test over the weekend, and they used the approach that says, we're gonna have battalions operating independently because it's earthquake and isolation, and the battalions are gonna be relaying orders to the rally points. And it would have been fantastic to pass some messaging that says, have any architects shown up at the rally points? Please provide their information, because the radio team is practicing digital, like scan in their credentials and send them downtown. So you could have actually been able to, you know, devise a, hey, if I had to do this in remote locations, let's test out whether this could work or not. So that's something we can build into the next, you know, practice exercise. Okay,
Sure.
So Good Sam law. So I am not going to be too enthusiastic because I believe in jinxes. So I'm going to be really calm about this. So I've been chasing Eileen Cody to sponsor a change to the Good Sam law for 2 years. Last year, I missed the deadline to really get a bill underway. This and the same with this session. For some reason, I thought you had to be elected, you know, before you started talking to him. So I waited till after the election and then called, and it was like, oh, you're too late. We got a really short session. And so call me after the session that just finished so that we can tee it up for next year. So I had a phone conversation with her last week, and she completely understood the problem. She was kind of shocked that it didn't cover more than just medical. I gave her 4 states that have generic where it's not just medical related. Hawaii was the one that I had been told by some other emergency managers that was a really good generic. Anyone in good faith who's doing anything to help in the response is not, you know, unless it's gross negligence or wanton acts, is covered under the Good Sam law. So her take on this is she has to go to the Judiciary Committee to do it because of its implications for liability. She said that they're probably going to have a special session because there's some other COVID liability problems that have come up that the legislature has been asked to address. So she is going to see if it can go into that special session. And if not, it would go into next year's session. So John, you and I should probably talk, and I'll get those words to you and make sure that they cover what you think is needed.
Yeah, the big gorilla is going to be the state EMD.
Well, I have been talking to Robert Ezell, who's the director, and I've said you cannot tell neighbors to help neighbors and pretend it's covered under Good Sam. If you're going to keep doing that, if this is rejected, then we're going to start telling people that, hey, by the way, you're not covered. And so the message that EMD wants to send out in all emergency managers, which is everybody help each other, we need to tell them what the truth is.
Yeah.
So he understands, and as long as I'm not screwing with his volunteer worker program, you know, he's okay. He just didn't want to do the work. So she's turned this over to staff, and I've asked if I should go to Robert and brief him that heads up it's coming. And I don't know when I'm going to talk to her next, probably in the next 2 weeks or so. But so if there's a special session, personally, I don't think they're going to get it in the special session because the lawyers are all going to have a heart attack.
Yep.
And I think the only other thing that will be added in our version of the Good Sam change is it's only when the local jurisdiction declares an emergency. It's not just for everything. And so that might be the one qualifier is we expect for the bad one, that's what we need the coverage for. So I'm fine if they put that in. So I've got my fingers crossed that we didn't get shot down right out of the gate. Eileen Cody completely understood it. There's several legislators. One of the legislators from the Wallingford area is a former hub captain. So I know that there are there's political support in it. And the east side, this is the east side of the state. This is something that there should not be any problem with either. I mean, that's how communities over there operate half the time anyway. So So John, we'll continue to coordinate on what you're looking for.
No, that'd be really good. It'd be helpful if we can get the state organizations on board too with that, like WABO and SEAW.
Well, you know, and I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like I'm hoping it's just a bill that just goes on and it slides through and we don't have to go down and testify in any of that business. But yes, you know, we do need to line up the speakers for support. So.
AIA and folks like that, yeah.
Right.
You know Rachel Minery, right?
I know the name. I've not met her.
Okay. She's an architect and would be a good advocate.
Okay, so I'll follow up with you. So hub captains, the thing to take from this is until we get it or not, we still need to have that discussion around in my Morgan Junction, you know, like I only got 2 buildings that I even could think about where people could go do a large-ish shelter. One's a church and the other one's a gym, you know, a gym with a concrete slab floor. So I have to go talk to them and go, by the way, do you have an architect on staff? Have we done? And I might have to do that matching for a while just so that the owners of those buildings start to think about those. So that's kind of where we're at, is if you have already relationships with people where you thought a building would be usable, this is a dimension you need to add to their conversation. So any other questions on this? Then we'll let John go. Okay, John, I really appreciate you coming. This was very helpful. Good to have a ground briefing for everybody to know where we stand.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for asking me, and thank you for your attention.
All right. Okay, so I'm not going to share up the agenda. I assume everybody can either look at it on their screen. The next thing we've got is just some quick updates and what's going on. On the COVID stuff, I got a call. I finally called the department because I had not heard anything about the masks thing from our deep dive discussion with the city on either distributing or advertising for masks. And they went out to because they were really targeting some of the vulnerable populations, the ethnic populations. They went to their community safety ambassadors, which is a group organized through DON. And they were able to do the distribution through them, and because they knew the business owners. and they got it out to the grocery stores that they were looking to place them with. So they all their real ask for us at this time is to continue to promote people who want to make and donate masks, to do it to United Way. And when somebody else is talking, I forgot to pull this up in advance. There's apparently on that website, if somebody goes, well, I don't just want to put, 100 masks into the big giant pot, you can go onto the website and designate which organization you want your mask to go to. So I'm going to go try and do that behind the scenes and see if I can pull it up, see what it looks like. But I asked her to send some more stuff out that people can put in their Facebooks or community newsletters or push out to continue to get the mask built. And then responding during COVID, oh, Margaret's going to do that. So the only other thing, is there anybody else who's got anything going on COVID related that you want to share right now? That's okay, Don, you can save it for around the room too. Margaret, several of us sat in on a webinar and I kind of just listened, I didn't take notes. Margaret took some good notes, so I'll turn it over to her.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay. Cindy sent along the summary of the notes I took. I actually took a lot more, but and I'm gonna assume either you can read them after the meeting or you've already read them. But I want to hit a couple of high points that I thought were pretty important. One has to do with your volunteers. And one of the things they talked about, one of the groups, was how they are keeping in touch with their volunteers. And they do that, I mean, for a variety of reasons, but I think it's a good practice right now, even though nothing is happening. I've been sharing web training opportunities. I told them we're probably going to have a Zoom meeting just to sort of check in because it feels really strange right now. As far as prepping for a drill, there were several things they suggested you want to do with your volunteers. One is you want to make sure of their health status before they arrive. You want to make sure they're going to be equipped with a mask, and I'm not sure what other PPE, the term we all know now, they might need, but you do want to make sure they understand your expectation is that they're going to be wearing a mask and that they really can't help if they aren't wearing one. Also that you would have social distancing protocols, and you would have the importance of a safety officer for the pandemic era really is high. You want someone who's paying attention to the fact that the crowds aren't clustered around, that people are wearing masks, that surfaces are getting. So the safety officer really has a bigger job than under normal circumstances. One of the things that one group talked about was having multiple stations. And I thought, well, how does that apply to us? And it applies that in that you don't want all your volunteers to be exposed to someone who's infected. So think about that as you set up, whether it's wider spacing between your stations or, just part of your team is there, knowing that you may have to sub out if somebody ends up being sick and or confirmed to have COVID who's been there on one of the shifts. The other thing is the hub box contents. You got to really think again. You've probably got masks in there if they haven't all been donated. And those you're going to not want to just use for a regular shift, I would think. You also want to have hand sanitizer and again, for cleaning, the disinfecting spray. The other thing is, yeah.
I meant to look it up. How long does hand sanitizer last?
Well, they say use it frequently if you're touching things.
Oh, no, I meant if I stuck it in my box this year and 6 years from now, I pull it out, is it good or am I going to be deluded that it's good?
I don't know about 6 years, but I'm sure it's good for, I'm sure it's good for longer. It's alcohol unless it's somehow degraded. I don't know what alcohol does, but that's a good question.
Alcohol doesn't degrade.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I've had mine for a couple of years. One of them, it still smells like.
Well, manufacturers actually say that it's good for about 3 years.
Okay, thanks. Probably, we hope we're done dealing with this at that point, but who knows? The other thing is that we talked a little bit about the shelters, and I understand from Cindy that the book that we're all picking up either this Saturday or subsequently is going to deal with some of this, but they would need to increase the space available for each person or family. So there's social distancing in a shelter. So there are some new requirements or new expectations for them to provide a healthy space, including having PPE and screening of people as they're coming in, cleaning surfaces, all of that kind of stuff. Adequate places to wash hands. And they also said that non-congregant, Red Cross is trying to move away from congregate sheltering because it's just hard when you've got a lot of people in a gym. So that's really it from that section. But do take a look at the notes that I sent, and if you have any questions, let me know.
The congregate sheltering is going to be awful. The earthquake that happened in Croatia, right, like in March during COVID, what they did was, instead of putting people in big congregate shelters, they had a bunch of student housing that was vacant because they had sent all the students home. So they were sheltering people in the student housing. So after that was probably inspected, but like it's just going to be dimensional puzzle. So
it's another one. And they said that their Red Cross is really looking at hotels and any dorms around if the buildings can be determined to be safe.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for taking those notes for us. That was
sure.
That was very helpful. Any questions for Margaret? So Margaret, I'm going to let you keep going because next on the agenda will be the talking about the fundraising. And let me go ahead and, do you want me to bring the budget up and put it on the screen?
Sure.
This is Cindy, this is Erica.
Okay, it helps me if you raise your hands over on the screen, then I know who's out of the 15 of you, I know who's talking. Okay, go ahead, Erica.
Okay, there was a question about what Margaret just presented on. Is the recommendation that they think that the distancing and all of that is something that we have and will be working with for years to come, or is this like if you're going to plan on running a drill in the next 6 months? I mean, is there an expiration date on those recommendations?
I think it's as long as the emergency orders are in place, or as long as we are trying to get rid of the virus or until there's a vaccine, any of those, whenever social distancing is still being practiced in the community.
Okay.
And the information we put in the hub books was, the only one we put that was specific was they doubled the space that a shelter needs, so that you could sleep head to foot and keep a 6-foot distance. So if they increase it to 10, yeah, we'll have to change that number. And then the other notes we put in there said, we can't predict what plague is coming next. Find your local information and comply with what they're telling you to do.
Yeah, the other interesting thing about the congregant sheltering was that they were prohibiting CPAP machines.
Oh, really?
Because they are aerosolizing. Yeah. That's exactly what they're doing. So they are a health hazard. So that adds a whole other dimension because there are a lot of those out there. Okay, let me just give you a little bit of background. We've had 2 meetings of this Hubcap's Leadership Steering Committee fundraising group. Our first meeting, we talked about that there ought to be a 2-year budget. We were thinking probably totally around $5,000. We thought it might be a GoFundMe opportunity. We asked one of our members volunteered to investigate Washington Nonprofit Corporation, 501c3, as well as working under the sponsorship of an established nonprofit who could be a financial sponsor for us. We also asked to have someone, I think the same person actually, Diane, did an investigation on how to set up an organizational checking account, which is all of which then we talked about at the second meeting. Based on Cindy's expenses plus other things we could anticipate, we came up with a 2-year budget, and you'll notice it actually came up pretty close to $5,000. So That was a good guesstimate. It was based on some thinking. Let me just say that we are bringing this to the hubcaps because it seems an important thing for the hubcaps to buy into. This is fundraising that's going to be going on, and we don't want to interfere with a individual hub's fundraising, however you're doing that. But we want you to know this is going to be happening. We did talk about 2 strategies, GoFundMe and then a text to give program. And we also are recommending that we do a fiscal agent, and we've asked Whittier Community Council if they'll accept that role for us. So here's the budget. I think you can see it. If you have any questions, let me know. But this is our proposal. And I can't see if there are questions. I guess.
Yeah, no questions so far. So.
Okay.
So you know, it's kind of like if anybody has a concern, say now. Otherwise, and then I sent out the words for a, you know, kind of a GoFundMe so that everybody understood this was for the network costs. We all benefit out of parts of this, but your own hub captain, you know, local fundraising can all happen on its own, and we shouldn't be stomping on each other. So we would send out the, you know, we have yet to figure out how a fundraising campaign goes, figure out how to get back to the Facebook account and the Twitter and all the other stuff, but we'll give you some stuff that you can push out across your social media, and that would be very helpful, or send it to your friends or family. And there's some discussion of doing like a template letter that if you've got people that you want to personally appeal to, that we would, you'd be able to send that out to. Erica?
Okay, I'm trying to unmute myself. What I'm curious is, when do you think you'll have the GoFundMe and that sort of stuff set up? I mean, we can't, it'll be hard for us to do the campaigns, funding campaign before that happens.
I don't know that we have the actual dates or anything like that ready at this point.
All we've got right now, I'm going to share it again.
Our theory was we wanted to get approval, and then, you know, that we can develop a timeline. We will be back in touch if this looks like a good plan.
So what I brought up was, you know, we should be able in the next couple of months, but certainly, as Ann said, before the end of the year, be able to, you know, have this going, and the sooner the better, because I'd like to raise the money and then we can just stop worrying about it and focus on our other stuff. So I've gotten a couple notes from people, some comments about 501c3s. I'll follow up with those when I can chat here in a second. So anything else, Margaret? So I think I'm seeing nobody was like, whoa, stop. This is our first step. We can follow up with 501c discussions later, but this gets us money to just be able to keep moving for 2 years and do future growth discussions and, you know, scope of our mission and stuff like that. It has been interesting. We have a whole new crop of city people, and it's really interesting that they think we're like, I don't know what I would call it, you know, like we're like the Red Cross of emergency preparedness, you know, like we're all out here waiting to do stuff and give out masks. And so it's like, well, I never thought we would want to do that, but I guess we can have that discussion. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the sharing. And anything else? Margaret, nothing else. Is Matt on today? I'll report from Matt. After we had our big bounce problem with the emails, we just figured there's a better way to do emails. And so Matt and Ian and Carl Leon have been poking around at different possibilities, you know, of web hosting, but we needed to also make sure we had a budget and we knew what we could do before they went off and spent, said, oh, let's find a program that costs $1,000 a year to do this. So we're going to give them some constraints, and then they can go out and look for the solution, which hopefully will be invisible to everyone. Hopefully we can use the same email address and all that stuff. So that's a tech committee question. The next thing on the agenda was the Good Samaritan Law. So you already heard about that. I talked to Chad after our Hub Captains meeting. Chad was our speaker from Seattle Public Utilities. And at the end, we were talking to him about things he knew that maybe we should put in our Hub Captains book, like, I don't know, the blivets or stuff like that, and things that we can just put in so that if you weren't listening to Chad and hearing how SPU was going to do things, the trash removal process. We just would have little one-pagers in our Hub Captains book that were, here's the tips on trash removal. Here's the tips on sanitation. He said, I love how you guys have done your bucket and you're teaching everybody how to do that, but we probably ought to tell people, reaffirm the best way to store that so that we don't have, hazardous waste problems down the road, a week into the disaster. So if anybody is particularly interested in helping work on that tip sheet, please let me know, and then we'll convene a little working group to see what topics should go into that. If you would probably easier to put it in the chat or send me an email afterwards, and then I can do a Zoom meeting. Any questions on that? Okay, ACS Field Day. So Carl and Dave, I were hoping, usually they're on. I don't see them tonight. So as I described here's how I got sucked into it. Ron was assigned to be a battalion, sitting theoretically at the battalion station in the event of a disaster, and he was receiving messages from ACS downtown to the fire chief and passing messages through the rally point. So I got to sit over his shoulder and watch what they were doing. It was almost no voice. It was almost all the commands, and the request for situation awareness was going through digital. So it was a really good exercise. It was very, very interesting. It sounds like it took about a first hour to work out the technical kinks. The second hour, a lot of messages went out, but they weren't getting replies back. It was kind of like the same drill. But they had some really interesting injects written, and so it made it a little bit more lifelike. I'm trying to remember any of the particular lessons learned. They had some problems keeping track, like they'd say, please send us a report of road damage and include pictures, which they did. I wish I had the picture we got out of Southwest. Somebody had taken a picture of the road out their window and hand-drawn cracks across it. It was great. But they can send that by radio. So, but they just had a problem keeping track of where they're getting all their situation report requests back. So that's a good lesson for the Hub Captains, is label stuff. And Bill Fay, were you on that practice? Was anybody else on today at that earthquake drill?
Yes.
Anything you want to add?
Well, I mean, it was all this advancement in the radio world of ACS into getting more people involved with digital communications. The idea of getting away from trying to just send everything by voice, which takes forever. You can send much more information and, like, say, pictures or these standard documents, 213s and damage assessments and all that kind of stuff. And it's got a long ways to go. A lot of people stumbled, but I think a lot of people gained from trying. But that's essentially what happened last Saturday.
Yep. And it was a good 3 hours. And so, so that was just good. Hub Rules, books, flyers, distribution. So we'll turn that over to Ann.
Hi, everybody. I've gotten lots of RSVPs. Real quick, I want to show you what you're picking up. So everybody will get 2 binders, and all these have in them is page protectors, open, blank, empty page protectors. So what comes in the plastic bag is there's 3 packets of information, 3 packs of paper. One is the Hub Captain book, the other one is the education book, and the third one is the job descriptions. And this will all be written down, so you won't, I'll send everybody that picks up a set of books the directions on how to put this all together. You have a page of labels. They're heavy duty labels. I was really hoping they would stick on the plastic folders that we have. I'm not confident they're going to. So you may have to, we may get to the point where we're just writing the name of the job description, you know, in black thick magic marker on these plastic folders. That's about it. It'll make some sense once you get into it. You got to pay attention to page numbers, and there's a couple sets of dividers in here, and I'll tell you which books those go into. So yeah, it'll make sense. So I also wanted to say, if anybody just wants to get a jump start on this, even if you're in the South Side, you're more than welcome to come on Saturday and just kind of, you know, pick it up and get started. Parking is really easy around my house. There's a park right across the street if you want to bring a dog and walk them around. So it, you know, my place is really easy to get to if you don't mind driving north.
And the second half of that is, I'm gonna share my screen because I don't know that people know I've been doing this for. Is now also in the Google Drive. So when I say I'm bringing all the rest of the stuff that we've been collecting and giving away for the hubs, you know, since about 2016. So A-frames, the universal communication cards, signage, the self-help posters, you know, we got caught right at COVID getting those out. So if you've got a number there, that means you've got it, and I've got notes of who picked up what. But anything that's yellow means I owe you. So I'm going to be up with Ann. She's going to have the Hub Captain box table, and I'll have all the other stuff table, so I can see my storage unit again. So if you're curious what's owed you, you can go in and look. But you know, it just goes on forever. And that's all the supplies that we have to give out to everybody. Oh, and the UASI maps. Those are the maps of Seattle that you can use to mark off, you know, this bridge down. So once Ann's north end session is done, I'll set up a south end session or a central or wherever we need to go. But anybody can come to any of these. And when we come to south, I'll have all the Hub Captain books and instructions to give out too. So. Questions? Any other questions for Ann?
Yeah, quick, just I've RSVP'd to you, Ann, but do I need to let you know when I'm coming exactly, or just
No, just show up, and then if it looks like there's, you know, 2 or 3 people standing in the driveway, then maybe just hang on for a second until we've got enough space.
Okay.
COVID thinking.
Yeah.
Okay. The last thing that we've got on the agenda, and then we'll have a half an hour either for around the room or to get out early. Ann and I were asked to do 101 trainings for the P patches, because as we've talked before, the city staff is still really interested in taking some of their stronger P patches and turning them into hubs, or getting them to understand more about the hubs and be prepared to be a community resource. So, you know, I'm going to tailor the location, and some are still like, I'm not sure I want to do this, and so it's going to be pretty basic. But if you have volunteers who you've just gotten on board and they're still, you know, what's this hub thing, they're welcome to tune in and listen. I'm going to post the link to that in the hub calendar. I've been kind of waiting until I'll do it the 1st of June. I don't want links in our calendar for very long. I just don't want to run that risk of, you know, somebody finding links and we get Zoom bombed or whatever. Then I have to lock down with passwords and stuff. So it'll be, there'll be all quick succession: Thursday night, June 11th, then Saturday morning, June 13th, and then Tuesday, a daytime session, 10 to noon. So that was all in the minutes. So. Okay, and then the last thing I've got is just to remind everybody that hopefully in July, we'll have the fire department as our guest speaker to start talking a little bit more about the battalions and stuff. And if he can't, I'll have Seattle Transportation on to talk about their plans for reopening roads so that the architects can get through to get to the areas to inspect. So, all right, so we're going to open it up and we'll do around the room again. So get ready to unmute. I'll do the usual starting up in the northwest. I have to look at my map so I don't lose its sector again. Starting up in northwest and then northeast. So go ahead and get ready, and I will call on anybody in the northwest who'd like to tell us what's going on in their neck of the woods or what you're up to.
Well, I'll start out. This is Jack from the Finney Hub, and there's really not been much going on. We're still trying to assemble information to create a hub book. We've been working with, shucks, the name is escaping me. The woman that's doing the Greenwood Hub, going to be talking with her about how to organize people, which is something that we're trying to do. But that's about it.
Pauline, is that who you're talking about?
Yeah.
She just gave me a thumbs up on her screen.
Yeah, you referred her to us, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you, Jack. Anybody next from Northwest? Hey, Ballard. Anybody from Ballard?
Not really. I'm here, but no. I mean,
no, I know.
Just neighbors.
We just almost been doing nothing on hub stuff, so it's okay. Northeast, anybody in the Northeast?
So Lake City doesn't really have anything, but we've been connecting with other hubcaps on other social issues, and it's a joy to do that. Cheryl and Cindy and Anne and Susanna.
Yep, there's all sorts of stuff that can be done. You know, it's just weird not doing things in person. So, anybody else in Northeast?
This is Anne at Victory Heights. We did the Hub Box tour. I have not looked at the video. I'm not looking forward to that, but I will watch myself on camera. It seemed to go, you know, it went okay. I'm not an actress, but I think I didn't really ever get a chance to see who was on the call. I think most of the folks that were there were hub captains. So thank you for the guys that tuned in. Thank you very much. Didn't get the community participation I was hoping for, but that's the story of our lives, I think.
Yeah. When the disaster happens, they'll be there.
Yeah.
Anybody else from Northeast? Oh, sorry.
Hey, Anne, I gotta say, I was there. You did a good job. You had good presence.
Thank you. There was a lot of ums.
So Anne, a question on the chat, is there a link being sent out for the answer? So I saw Matt put something in Slack, which means nobody, you know, only half the hub captains get it. Do you have that link?
I need to research it. I got kicked out of the meeting at right before we went live. So everything I had set up got thrown out. So I'm going to take a look at Matt's. Yeah, I'm going to take a look at Matt's recording and see if I can't put it in a more public place.
Well, I'll work with you because we have a Hub Captain's YouTube channel.
Right, that
should go there. So, so the answer to the question is we will get that in the minutes.
Okay, there we go.
Yep.
There we go.
Can Anne say any more about what's happening with SNAP in the city?
The only thing I know is that we're not doing anything. The volunteers that teach SNAP and individual disaster preparedness have been told to stand down until they tell us how we're going to reopen. So we are not being encouraged or even allowed to do Zoom meetings with communities. We can do it as individuals, but not as volunteers of the city. So we are all on hold, which is a shame because they had like 10 to 15 new volunteers that were being trained just as COVID hit. So there's a lot of people out there that got really excited and got trained and haven't been able to use any of their skills or their new knowledge.
And and Susanna and Ann and I have talked about having some sort of remote learning for Stop the Bleed. So it's a little complicated because the important part of Stop the Bleed is really the hands-on.
Right.
But we've talked about, I think it was really Ann and Susanna who talked about having people buy a tourniquet, practice with it without actually tightening it, and mocking up some sort of a way to do wound packing with materials in hand. And then we could do the slides, but that's not happened yet.
I had this flash of people using their hoarded toilet paper as packing supplies.
Nobody's going to use their toilet paper for anything.
In that effect.
Too precious.
So two things jumped to me. I forgot to put Hub in a Box on there, so I'm going to come to that. But Anne wrote the original Neighbors Helping Neighbors guidance. Well, we tried again we sent it to Matt Offlick to see if he could get it out of the EOC and make it official. And actually, he liked it. And what they did is they're turning it into a card in 14 languages where the front is, hi, I'm your neighbor. Here's my name. Here's how to contact me. And on the back is some of that guidance around how to safely help your neighbors. So we're going to get a product that we can hand out to people for use in the next, or the next wave of COVID that helps the messaging of neighbor help neighbor. So that was a very cool thing that didn't come out the way we thought, but it's almost better the way it is. So Hub in a Box, shoot, I forgot about that. I had a teleconference. Ann and I were on a teleconference Friday morning because I asked, I got a Hub Captain meeting coming up. What's the status? And so it reminded me when Sandy was talking about what's being done and what's not, and they're cutting way back. The city is going to just recognize that they're going to have such a budget hole that they're going to look for every dollar they can. But the discussion was, as far as we know, that money is still allocated, and when the department gets back on its feet, we should be able to talk with them about the process for getting the Hub in the Box going again. So it has not been pulled away. They were trying to figure out how much community building versus supplies. And, so we're working with them on that, but it still looks like it's going forward. So all of you who are sitting there waiting for Hub in a Box to come to life, I'd say this summer at this point, mostly because of the COVID.
And Cindy, I don't know if this has come up for the whole group, but as far as we know, the Department of Neighborhood Small Sparks grants are non-existent for 2020. They're not even opening the program. So if you were hoping to get a box through that avenue, it's probably not going to happen.
Right. That's part of the clawback of money. So. All right, last call for Northeast. Central West.
Yeah, Central West, we haven't done much. We had the big ham exercise last weekend, which most of us here. But the one thing we've done because of all this downtime is that we've sort of rebranded ourselves. We had this website, miquabeprepared.org, that kind of got old and stale and everything else. So now we have a new website.
Oh, Bill.
Share.
There we go. I'm sorry.
Bill, I just unmuted you again.
Okay.
You had a boring website.
Okay, we had a boring website. So now we have a new website. It's called miquahubs.org. So check it out. And I believe I'm trying to send it. There we go. It should go out on the chat. It's just a whole new website, a little simpler and of course, better organized and everything else. So you can go in there and even sign on to get part of our email distributions and stuff like that. So that's what MIQA has been up to with all our downtime. And we've been spending a lot of time on Zoom pretty much every day at some point, talking to each other and getting things moved forward until we get back on our feet and out of the house. That's it.
Great, thank you. Other from Central West.
Am I Central West? Is Belltown?
Yeah, that works. Fill the blank.
We had a a brief meeting with our 4 main members and we're discussing whether we're even going to deploy during this this pandemic. And we decided we're going to meet, and we have a new rendezvous place that's just a little closer to where we all live, and we're going to decide what to do kind of ad hoc. So that's what we've done.
That's actually a really good idea. Because then if you don't deploy, you won't have been standing there, and you can at least, would you go put signs up at the hub that, you know?
That's a good point. That's probably something that we would do. Yeah.
Yeah, this is good. Cross your fingers. Let us get through this. I'm happy that every day we learn, you know, it's a little less restrictive about, you know, it's not like if you touch something, you're immediately going to get COVID. The science is teaching us more stuff. So getting to the end and knowing how risky it is going to be really important.
Yep.
Central East. Anybody from Central East?
I'm Diane. Our hub was renamed Judkins Park Hub since the park gave us a location there, and we're hoping to actually incorporate the Judkins Park neighborhood and make it a larger pool to get people interested in actually being hub people. So that's where we're at, and we do. This is probably old news. We have the grant came through, and we have a box that was donated, but we're not purchasing anything or placing anything because of the stay at home. This happened like right on the cusp of COVID.
So Diane and Forrest, you were going to try and reach the parks guy. Did you ever hear from him?
You know, I drafted the email and never sent it. So let me get it sent.
Yeah, because that's the same guy who has to help Diane, and I figured, I'll wait and see if he responds to you before Diane and I ping him.
I'll let you know.
Are you talking about Will?
Yeah.
Yeah. Beatty.
Okay.
Excuse me, can I get the name of her hub?
Her hub is
again, Cindy or Diane, the name of it?
Diane's hub was Climbing Water, and that was now changed to Judkins Park Hub.
Judkins Park. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I keep getting a message that something's screwing with my audio, but we'll keep going. Oh, and Bill, you got a comment. Nice looking website. Anybody else from Central East? I saw Lee Nolan on here, and her group, the Homer Harris Hub, is the one doing the recovers.org website. So I was kind of hoping she would give us a little info about what they've been doing. I saw in their report to the city that they've been helping a whole bunch of organizations organizing, getting supplies for helping with meal deliveries and stuff. So we'll have to pump her to give us a call out next time. So in the Southwest, anybody want to report for Southwest? I don't know of anything going on in the Southwest, so how about Southeast?
I could report. Lakewood Seward Park, just 2 things. One is I wasn't sure whether people would want to keep meeting during the pandemic, and we've had a Zoom meeting once a month just like normal, and actually I'm getting really good turnout. I got 14 people at my last meeting. Sometimes I can't get that in person, you know, so that was good. And then I wanted to just report on one other thing we did. So we were very jazzed about the new brochures, and I was lucky enough to get 100 of these. But we all thought it's wonderful to publicize the network, but how do we mention ourselves in this? And so I didn't want to disturb the back where, you know, it's Seattle Emergency Hubs has their website and so on. But we found a spot right here on the second panel where it says volunteer for your hub. And then there's a redundant mention of the website here. Find out more, and it gives the URL again for Seattle Emergency Hubs. So we had 500 2x2 stickers made, and we put our stickers right here on there. And I'd be happy to do some screenshots and put it on Slack or send an email if I'm allowed to do that. I know the mass emailing is frowned upon, but I will share this somehow or put it on Google Drive or something.
No, mass emailing is, we want mass emailing. We just can't have 6 replies.
Okay.
It's 750 emails an hour.
Okay. So anyway, I will share this, what we did and what didn't work and what we might suggest to others to do.
Very cool. That's a great idea. By the way, and I forgot to say that, we will have hub brochures at the handout on Saturday and anytime we see people, so that you can take like 50 of them so everybody's got a stash, you know, for whenever we can do, you know, in-person events again and hand them out.
Right.
Better not to just dump them off at the library, because then we don't know who we've talked to. But for events and recruiting, that's a really cool idea. Thank you, Linda.
Sure.
Anybody else from Southeast? Okay. I had one more thing I needed to make sure. Oh, so we would not meet next month. So do we want to, you know, what happens when we're meeting monthly like this is I'm stomping on Ann's regular meeting. So should we just skip next month? Unless, I mean, I didn't have a guest speaker lined up. Fire department's supposed to come in July, so it would just be a touch base. Can you use the thumbs up thing? And if you think we should meet, give me a thumbs up. And if you don't think we should meet, just don't do anything. I'm seeing a couple. I don't mind setting it up. And if Ann's okay with it and that we take away her Northeast, I'll just set it up, and I might just send out an agenda and say, you know, we're just going to catch up and, you know, make it really fast and not even really do the around the room, because there's just not that much going on, but just a way to stay in touch and check out who's drinking what tonight. So, okay. Anything else? Last comments? We got 10 minutes early. Yay. I don't think I have anything else that I wrote down, as I got one volunteer for the SBU thing. Okay, I think we're good. Thank you guys very much for joining in, and I'll stop recording and we'll get the minutes out, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you, Ann.
bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, I think it's safe to end.